There are a couple of assets that New Orleans has that I think maybe voters don't know about. The first is there is a group of volunteer observers who are in court every day that there's a trial docket, Project Nola. They have a website and they publish reports about their observations of the judges and how they perform. And they are looking for a number of criteria, all of which are related to what we expect judges to perform. Are they listening? Are they treating everybody fairly? Or are they respectful to everybody in the courtroom? Is the courtroom organized? And so on. Those kinds of markers that tell us that someone's coming to work, knows their job, and is doing their job to a certain standard. The second thing is the Metropolitan Crime Commission has produced reports now for almost 9 years on criminal justice system accountability, which is somewhat about the interaction between the police and the district attorney, and then a separate set of reports that analyzes how well cases move through the judicial system. And there are critics of these reports saying efficiency isn't everything, and that's in fact true. But when you combine the findings and observations of Project Nola with the efficiency rankings of Metropolitan Crime Commission, and you really read about the system as a whole from those accountability reports, you begin to get a picture of how the system is functioning. What we found at Baptist Community Ministries is that there's sort of a hole in the information universe at the moment, in that there's not an information source which focuses on the entirety of the system and puts readily available information in front of voters about the system as a whole. We are going to launch a new site, Project Justice Nola, which we used in 2008 for the judicial elections to bring voters some unbiased information about the candidates then. But what we're doing differently now is we're going to perpetuate the site, and we're going to bring voters information about the system. How does the system work? Who's in it? We're going to try and catalog and bring some order to some of the news stories that appear in the paper. And as with a lot of news stories, something happens in the system or that relates to the system. People read it one day, the next day it's gone, and frankly, we're human beings. We can't remember and focus on every detail. However, a site that sort of brings all those pieces together in one place is what we hope Project Justice Nola will be. And it will enable people to go there and look at a whole variety of information about the system and how it works. Another one that I'll mention is, since New Orleans has had the Office of the Inspector General up and running, the Inspector General has conducted a number of reviews and audits of traffic court and municipal court. Those reports are available on the OIG's website, but we also hope to bring some slightly more reader-friendly data from those reports in the form of extracts, so that people who don't read 60-page reports for a living can actually get sort of a digest of what's available in those reports, and then they can look at it in more depth if they choose to. And finally, there are people who look at criminal justice systems all over the country. And one of the difficulties, I think, in New Orleans is there's a tendency, and to a large extent this is absolutely uncategorically true, we're different here. We are different. In a lot of ways we're different, and in a lot of ways that makes us better. On the other hand, there are some things that we could afford to do that are more like places in the country where things are done more efficiently and more effectively. The fact of the matter is that New Orleans is the largest city in the state, in the country, in the world, that incarcerates more people than anybody else. And it's kind of jarring when you look at it like that. We're a state with slightly over 4 million people in population, and we have some other outcomes about which we might not be incredibly satisfied. But one thing that we do, I think, that contributes to the difficulty we have as a state moving forward is that we incarcerate a lot of people. We arrest a lot of people, we prosecute a lot of people, we jail a lot of people. And that isn't to say that a criminal justice system that punishes those people who need it isn't important. It is critically important. I know I have been the victim of serious crime. I know lots of other people who have been, and nobody that has been would argue about the necessity for swift and certain justice. On the other hand, we've been, I think, appropriately criticized perhaps for the harshness of some of our sentencing laws and the slowness with which we're addressing those. So I think that the other thing that we'd like to bring to the site is some ideas for people to look at, so that in election cycles going forward, and as they pick people to work for them, people have a little bit more rounded picture of what a really effective criminal justice system ought to include. We're going to put up a brief article that describes for people who's in the system and what do they do. You have only to read comments in the newspaper sometimes. Crime is a very emotional topic, so people read about something that really makes them angry, and they write a comment that says, the police shouldn't let people out of jail, people like that out of jail. Well, police really only arrest people. They don't decide who stays in jail. They don't decide what the sentence is. They don't decide if they're on probation, what the terms are. The judge is the one who determines the sentence, but the judge determines the sentence within guidelines provided to him or her by the state. So sometimes there are probably unsatisfactory outcomes in the community's, from the community's point of view about a sentence that really doesn't have anything to do with the judge. Most people don't know that. What we'd like to do is populate our site with some information that shows people the relationship and the connections between those parts of the system so that they can do things like weigh in with their legislator. When the legislature is in session and they can find out what bills are alive, what ideas are being considered, people can actually form an opinion, and they can share that opinion with the people, again, that they hire to work for them to represent their interests in the legislature. They can weigh in with the court about something that happened, a process that they read about and understand better. Unfortunately, people are at a disadvantage about weighing in on a public servant's performance if they don't really understand how that job is supposed to function. And as somebody who used to work in the criminal justice system, I know that it can be very confusing to people who are not familiar with it. And there isn't anyone in that system whose job it is to provide, if you will, sort of customer service. There's no mall kiosk when you walk in the front door anywhere where somebody says, oh, you need shoes, you go this way, or you need to know what to do about your bond, then you go there. There's no customer service kiosk in criminal justice. So for people to be able to access that in an environment where we're not selling anything, we really don't endorse candidates, we try very hard to present information that gives people something to look at that isn't about a personal conflict or a personal failing or a personal calling out. Probably everybody in New Orleans remembers when the superintendent was Mr. Compass and the district attorney was Mr. Jordan in the period after Katrina. It was really awful because what happened was the court of public opinion was populated with what I call podium moments, where one accused the other of being a failure and contributing to some problem that arose during that time period. That's really not helpful. There are problems in every public system. The question becomes, what's the solution? And do we, as voters, are we picking people and are we holding people accountable who will problem solve? Not just blame each other and not just criticize each other, but problem solve. So we feel like sometimes there are solutions out there that if people knew they were available and knew what to ask for, it would make them more able to tell their employees, if you will, that they hired to work for them, what it is they'd like to see done differently. What BCM would hope for out of working on this site and bringing it to people is that it would help make the community more able to insist on not just tough justice, not just hard stuff, but on smartness. You know, being tough isn't enough. If tough were enough, we would be the safest city in the safest state in the safest country in the world. Clearly something's not working. So we hope that people will come to appreciate that there are different ways of doing things, some of which are smarter and better than others, just like anything else in life. And that eventually what folks will come to appreciate is that if they're informed and they're smart enough and knowledgeable enough to insist on something, and they're voting regularly, and they're letting folks know who run for office in front of them that this is what they want, that eventually people will get the leaders that they really need. That's what we hope.